When Schumann began composing his Third Symphony between November and December of 1850, he was writing in a form that had evolved significantly since the beginning of the century. Beethoven had elevated the genre to an unprecedented level of cultural meaning and prestige by investing his Third, Fifth, and Sixth Symphonies with a sense of narrative that he then fulfilled more explicitly in his Ninth. This aesthetic technique was extremely attractive to the Romantics, who saw storytelling and description as powerful tools for expressing their deeply subjective, unrestrainedly imaginative ideas. But at this moment when the symphony had reached its highest stature, its structural underpinnings were being washed away. While Beethoven appeared to have revolutionized the form, his structural innovations were actually rather limited. His most important technical contribution, which he introduced in his Fifth Symphony and employed again in his Ninth, involved taking important material that appeared early in a piece and interpolating it with dramatic and structural intent at various points as the work progressed. These reappearances gave the material symbolic significance, and their iterations within the context of the entire symphony created the impression of a tale being spun out on a large sonic canvas. In this respect, Beethoven planted the seeds for the full-blown novelization of the symphony that appears in the works of Berlioz and Mahler. Otherwise, his reforms were more a matter of emphasis than substance. He expanded the genre's scope and employed a rhetorical style that was far more intense and personal than that of his predecessors. And yet there isn't a movement in a Beethoven symphony, with the exceptions of the Storm and the Pastoral and the Finale of the Ninth, that isn't derived from a form with which Haydn and Mozart would have been completely familiar. While many of Beethoven's symphonies express a romantic ideological spirit, they always do so with classical means. Long after his death in 1827, composers would have to come to terms with the fact that the revolutionary fervor and individualistic boldness in Beethoven's symphonies that inspired them to write their own was tightly bound to the musical aesthetics and grammar of the mid to late 18th century. At its most basic structural level, the symphony was an invention of the classical era. Although our natural attraction to melody leads us to perceive musical structures based on the occurrence and recurrence of distinctive tunes and melodic patterns, the fundamental organizing principle upon which symphonic writing was based was the creation of a harmonic outline. In simplistic terms, the forms of symphonic movements were defined by the establishment of a key, a series of calculated harmonic steps away from it, and eventually its return. This arc-like method of organization was not only applied within movements. By choosing each movement's home key in a similarly calculating fashion, the composer could create a large-scale harmonic outline that gave the symphony as a whole a sense of unity. This procedure was facilitated by the technical limitations of the period. As a matter of acoustics, it's impossible to tune the 12-note chromatic scale in a way that will make all the intervals sound pure. To address this, various tuning systems, or temperaments, were developed. Until the 19th century, the most commonly used temperaments yielded good intonation, but in a limited number of keys. And yet this limitation was foundational to the effectiveness of the formal structures composers employed. Each constituent of this circumscribed group of keys could serve as an identifiable structural pillar in a coherent large-scale design, in the same way that the use of a limited number of colors can give a piece of visual art a sense of clarity and strength. Nonetheless, many composers became dissatisfied with the limited harmonic palette at their disposal, and it was this desire for a greater range of usable sonic colors that eventually led to the adoption of a tuning system known as equal temperament. Whereas other systems arrange the pitches in the chromatic scale in a manner that creates very good and very bad sounding keys, in equal temperament, the interval between each adjacent chromatic note is equalized. As a result, all the other intervals are impure, but only to an extent that's theoretically tolerable. Equal temperament affords complete freedom in key choice and harmonic modulation, and by the 1820s it was the de facto standard across Europe. But this bounty of musical color gradually undermined the structural basis of the symphony. Simply as a matter of aesthetics, when a wide range of options are used in profusion, a change is less noteworthy than if it had taken place in a limited context. Much of the heavenly length Schumann diplomatically referred to in describing Schubert's large-scale works can be ascribed to his passion for what the pianist and scholar Charles Rosen has called purple patches, sections in which the structure is temporarily derailed as he shifts to a harmonic area that's unexpected and exotic. In many respects, Schumann's Third Symphony, which was inspired by his move to the Rhine Valley town of Düsseldorf in 1850, is a manifestation of the dichotomous influences that defined him as an artist. Many of the characteristic qualities of Romanticism, introversion, subjectivity, a veneration of nature, a fondness for depiction, and an attraction to literary narrative, are immediately apparent in his works. And yet he was also a traditionalist, an aspect of his artistic personality that set him apart from some of his most important contemporaries, particularly Wagner and Liszt. This essential difference between tradition-informed and revolutionary expressions of Romanticism was the basis of the so-called War of the Romantics that raged within Central European musical circles for the remainder of the century. Thus, the Rhenish Symphony is a synthesis in which the evocative intimacy of Schumann's smaller, often highly romantic works is placed within a structure that reflects Beethoven's heroic, classically based symphonic model. The outer movements in this five-movement work provide ballast by virtue of their traditional formal structures and their emphasis on the symphony's home key of E-flat, while the middle three are short, harmonically explorative mood pieces that function as intermezzi. The fourth movement is a wonderful example of Schumann's powers of musical depiction. Its chorale-like austerity brilliantly evokes the composer's impressions of the magnificent Cologne Cathedral and provides material that, in the manner of Beethoven, returns in the finale, where it is transformed into a herald of joyful celebration, bringing this remarkable work to a triumphant close.